All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Firefly Review Board. Troy Baker makes his live action debut as James.
James.
And
James.
yeah,
As James.
The right
He makes his live
hands.
action debut as James. Joel goes ahead and walks through the snow, and Ellie, my, Bella Ramsey, may she steal the hearts and souls of all the Americans in the world. Here we go. We got a new person here today. We got Shaylin, we got Fumba, we got Abby. Let's dive into this puppy. What were you guys' overall thoughts of this episode?
very, very good. Definitely one of my favorites of the show. It's ramping up to be like it. I think in terms of like action-packed episodes, this is my favorite one because the other action-packed episode before this, we weren't too big of fans of because it just felt really rushed with Sam and Henry. So this one, I felt like it accumulated a lot more, and it still felt a little rushed at the end, I think. But where we leave off is heartbreaking, and Bella Ramsey does steal the show every time, and this episode's no different.
Yeah, I agree. I think yeah, I really like this episode. Yeah, I agree with Avi. I think the pacing's a little towards the end, it's a little rushed, but I think it still is in tandem with like I feel like this episode's still slightly in tandem with the game with some minor differences, but also just really solid storyline in this. I also very much enjoyed to hate David in this episode. I wasn't sure how they're gonna make me hate him more in the game, and they succeeded in a way that's great. But yeah, no, great episode overall. Really enjoyable.
Yeah, honestly, I'd say like Avi said, this is easily one of my favorites. And I think this was the episode that, and that's not to discredit how good this season's been so far, but I think something I noticed with this episode is that they're really, really talented at making like the departures from the main timeline episodes. So like episode 3 like long time, and then looking at Ellie's flashback in episode 7, they're really good at making them like thematically valuable and engaging. That I think other shows, like, it kind of, the pacing stops when you do flashbacks or when you give storylines and backstories in the middle of a season. Those always tend to be like skips for me. And the
Mm.
fact that we get like a perfectly placed Ellie focused episode right after we see a little bit more about her background, it's just like such a cohesive story that I think is like just being developed so well over the course of a season thus far. And like I've already said, I haven't played the game, so I'm just like here for this ride. Like I'm just picking up new pieces of information, and I love how they're just like, I am like just being funneled little nuggets. I'm just enjoying it so much. And Bella Ramsey's my queen. I am her subject. I love that girl so much. She's the shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this like episode was, I mean, it's on tandem for some of my favorite episodes, episode 3 and I think episode 6 was some of the higher ranking episodes for me. This one, we talked about it last week. It really, really hinged on who played David and making us believe for at least a little while, at least especially for people like you, Shaylin, who haven't played the game, to like think that this might be a decent human being at first, right? And then having that shift. So I think Scott Shepherd did an outstanding job of walking that line between, a person where he's continuously saying, his dialogue is saying that he's a great guy, but he's obviously not. He's like
Yeah.
scum of the earth, right? So I think Scott Shepherd, the guy who played David, did an amazing job.
Really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, yeah. I love this performance. I think that he really did nail like just this underlying sense of threat and just like awfulness that David eventually reveals towards the end of the show. I like it's cool because we start off with him leading like this, what was it, congregation in the church, right?
Yeah.
Which was different. Like that wasn't really in the games. You didn't really see a lot of David in terms of where he's from. Rather, you just start off with Ellie and then you're introduced. But you introduced to David like in the wild. So it was kind of cool to see there being like in a religious origin with this character. And I think it also did play into the manipulation that he pulled over his flock and how he's using this newfound sense of God or whatever have you as a way to put these people in a chokehold and to essentially do heinous shit while he gets to live as a king. It just added a new layer
As a god. As a god.
Basically,
He literally describes himself as a
literally,
god.
yeah,
And he's like,
actually
do as your father says. Be quiet. What? Excuse me?
Eat some soup.
Yeah, like the guy's got
Yeah.
some serious god complex, messiah
Yeah.
complex going on.
Yeah.
And he's like,
Mhm.
he's not even doing a good job. He's like, he's the worst
Really
messiah.
bad at
He's
it.
making them eat each other. Like, you're doing a terrible job right now, my dude. All right.
Yeah.
No reason to call yourself a messiah, let alone a god, you know?
Yeah, I think Scott Shepherd did a great job. It's interesting because we talked about this a little last time, but in the game you have an entire introductory sequence with Ellie hunting already, and then she meets David all alone at the cabin, and Ellie obviously doesn't trust David at first, but then there's a portion in the game where they have to protect themselves from a bunch of infected coming in, and then Ellie's like, maybe I can trust this guy now. But in this
Right.
show completely, I think they go right off the bat with trying to get the viewer to not trust David at all, like from the get-go. Like there's no point at all.
This guy sucks.
And because you see that through the actions of, because I think Troy Baker as James really added to the characterization of David too, because you see his like right hand man so scared of him and like facing that abuse. Like that's who David is. And like even at the line at the end of the episode where he screams, it's like, I am a good person. And it's like that's so much of what he believes, you know. And he's like a character, and I really love how they fleshed into this more in this episode, of like someone who found power after the apocalypse. And I just think that's so interesting to kind of see. Someone like, he was probably a nobody in like the real world, you know, probably like spiteful, hateful, and then he took like people who were weak and needed something, and he like abused that. So showing that kind of mental characterization, I think, was really well done. And yeah, Scott Shepherd did a great job.
That's a really good point. I never really thought about that. I know they dropped that he was a teacher before. I don't know if that's consistent with whatever like the game canon is, but I
Oh, I
will
didn't
say I
realize that.
disagree. Yeah, he mentions that he was a teacher for students that were like close to Ellie's age, which just becomes like even more terrifying,
Worse,
like realizing
worse.
what he does to
Well,
people.
teachers
Like,
aren't respected enough, so I could kind of like see that too. Like,
Yeah, like
yeah,
they shit
but
all
I
the
will
time.
say I disagree that I do think there were good reason to not trust David. I definitely think that. I will say, as someone that didn't have like the context of who he is, and from what I understand, some people are really disappointed with how he was portrayed, and maybe that is because he's like apparently a really big villain in the game. And how much justice can you do someone of like that stature in like a 55-minute episode? But besides the point, I did question if David was trustworthy, and I did feel like that was one of those like proxies for being Ellie. Like you went through kind of ebbs and flows of being like, oh, but James is the one that wants to kill Ellie all the fucking time. Like the people in the congregation are the ones that are like constantly wanting revenge and to kill Ellie when she's on the fucking ground. Like James is the one, or David is the one that's saving her. So in between like these weird kind of narcissistic ego driven moments to where you're like something's up with you, he's still the one that's saving her and you don't quite understand why.
yeah,
So I do think it kind of ebbs and flows between trusting him, not trusting him. And I didn't really have a trust in James until a little bit later, but definitely took note that like everyone's afraid of him. And when he slaps Hannah, I was like, shit, okay, he's clearly not a great guy. But before that point, I think I could have been convinced.
Right.
okay, yeah.
I think it's one
So
of the
just
big
like the
things that I-
introductory sequence when they saw Ellie at first, like with the deer.
Yeah, and I think it's another part of it that I think is like a really interesting. I was rewatching it before we met here, and I was trying to think what were some of the scenes or like tactics used from a direction standpoint that made me feel like I could trust David. And something that I saw actually in another video was the moment of seeing them like with the deer before. Like that was a very genuine moment of seeing two people starving. Like, should we take this? And them just kind of having a moment alone. The more that we got to see them independently seemingly just act like normal people, the more that you felt like they had some kind of trustworthy quality. Not to say that that completely dispels the fact that like there were clear indicators that David was horrible, but I think in the beginning when you have kind of that seed of doubt, or him giving, Ellie the penicillin. And I was like, oh, it's poison. Like, that's definitely going to kill someone. And when it didn't, I was like, wow, David's a saint. Like,
Yeah, I think it's
there were
smart too
there
because
were
like
few things that kind of pushed me towards like maybe you can trust him, but I was still like, shoot him in the head, Ellie. What are we doing? Take that
Yeah.
deer home.
Yeah.
Do
I
it.
think it's smart because like it's showed David like he is willing to throw anyone in his congregation under the bus, especially for this random girl. But it's also like the definition of grooming. That's what he's doing. He's giving Ellie like what she wants first,
Yeah.
and then like trying to get her to like be like on his side. And it completely like came to fruition when like he was trying to hold her hand and Ellie fucking broke it.
Because
Bella Ramsey. Bella
Yeah.
Ramsey.
Dude, that scene
Oh.
where she's
that
like,
scene was awesome.
yeah, that scene was
Calling Ellie's the
crazy.
girl that broke your
Ellie broke
fucking
her-
Yeah,
finger?
dude, that line, dude, fire.
It
Like
hit.
her
He
delivery.
nailed it, bro.
Oh
Bella
my
Ramsey
god, yeah.
nailed it.
Oh,
I feel like the
No.
big thing with David is that it's you like going back to that grooming aspect. He's doing good deeds, but it's under like the conditions of those.
Exactly. It's a
Oh,
false
right.
messiah. That's what it is. Like
No, yeah, it literally is.
He's got a Messiah complex. This guy's got some issues. Okay,
I like how Ellie's like, was it a cult? He's like, no, not exactly.
exactly a cult. Exactly a cult.
Flat out. Because to me, watching it, it's interesting, right? Because you seeing in a scenario that this person, child or not, killed someone in your congregation, or at least connected someone that killed someone in your congregation, and there's a deer there, and you're letting the child go in an apocalypse, and it's in any other scenario in this setting, that's not going to happen. So there has to be some kind of condition in terms of why he's doing it. I feel like the sense of doubt is just to what extent is it like, do you want her to be a part of the congregation or something worse? And evidently it's worse, right?
Mhm.
And I think that was always the thing, because I feel like that sense of doubt, like I played the game, but I feel like where that sense of doubt should noticeably dissipate is when you see how he treats the people in his flock when they're eating, like that dinner scene, right? Because it's clearly they're eating something putrid, and he's actually eating like genuine food, and there is a power balance between.
Yeah, I took that whole dinner scene completely different after finding out that they were
Oh,
people.
like the fact that he like
Soylent
everyone else is
Green!
like James
Yeah.
is over there, Troy Baker's like being like hating his life, and David's over there being like, this is fucking delicious.
David has a full
Oh my
plate. At
God.
first, I was pissed. I was like, he has more of the food. Then I was like, oh, he has
Oh.
more of the food.
Oh yeah, so much more.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
Oh wait, yeah,
perfect.
actually, damn. I assumed he was eating like something else, like a deer or some shit. He's
That's
eating
not how I
so
took
much
it.
more of the food.
He's getting worse by the minute.
No.
Man. He's just a terrible. I don't know who elected you to be in charge, but you're voted off this island, man. I'm just.
Dude, that's what he kept saying too. He's like, well, they wanted me to be like their ruler.
Like,
And it's like, but everything he's doing is through abuse. Like you'd never give anyone a choice or like a voice either, you know?
yeah.
because he's speaking through the words of God,
Yeah.
and that's like a big thing. If you're religious,
But
and
that's
you're
what
saying,
was
I
so
can
interesting too.
speak to God.
I
Yeah.
guess it's interesting because, like, what is God in this scenario? And of course, like,
And he said cordyceps, right? That's what his answer was. Like
Yeah.
that wasn't in the game. Actually, that was really interesting to
I
bring
like
up.
that
Like
angle.
wasn't.
because he said he
Yeah.
didn't find God until after the apocalypse. For like that alone is really interesting to see how someone could like utilize this situation for their own benefit. And then he was saying like cordyceps is God. Like this is like the reset for everything, you know?
Too much psilocybin.
And I think that makes sense. I think if, as someone that like is religious, I mean, when the apocalypse comes and all that's left of life is like to roam the fucking earth, running from infected or from like fellow humans driven into fucking anarchy. Actually, we kind of love anarchy, but not like that kind of anarchy. Like, it's what is your idea of a god? Like, do you still think of that as like a merciful, loving being? Or do you think of it as being more punishing and being unforgiving and like constantly detrimental to your well-being? Like, I think everyone's idea of God or what might be innately good in the world is like does it even exist? Because
Mhm.
like, look at how everything is. I'm not surprised that people would accept, or I think there's a lot of validity to people believing in like a really evil and like scary version of like a higher being, you know, especially after the
Like
apocalypse. Like,
Catholicism.
I get
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say one thing. I am like super happy by the fact that Joel is like a little bit more game Joel. Like what they did with Pedro Pascal in this episode, it was like, damn, I'm looking at what the game was exactly all about, right? And it's interesting how they kind of handle like the background characters, right, differing from the game itself, right? Because I think a lot of us have obviously like played the game, right? But I think one of the things they do great in this episode, or the series rather, is fill in those background characters, those CPUs essentially that were in the video game that you would just mow down without even a second thought. The fact that you actually take the time to actually see the repercussions of this person that is going around and murdering people, Joel and Ellie,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
That to actually
Casually.
have to see those repercussions, I think is a really interesting angle into like maybe some of the anger and vendetta that the actual CPUs never really got, that we never really got to see. So I think that's really interesting. But
Is it a plot point in the game
I'm
that
thinking
they're pursuing the killer of Alec?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I think the game's. I would have to say the game does as good of a job with that. I think because like the fucking torture scene is exactly the same.
yeah,
Like you
Yes.
see Joel spring back, Ellie's gone. He needs to get her back. He does not get. There's like no morals standing in his way right now. You know, like she's gone. So I think like taking that part specifically from the game was a really smart idea. Just because like I think Joel isn't as brutal in the show as he is in the game sometimes.
I don't
And
think
then
he can be. I don't think it's
Yeah.
possible.
but I just don't
Yeah,
know if it's
from
just
what I
me seeing
heard,
Pedro Pascal too. Like
Yeah.
it's just too likable, you know.
The thing is, like, that scene in the game was, I felt that a bit more than watching it because you like because you know you're watching Joe and it's realistic and he's like fatigued because he just got fucking stabbed.
Mhm.
So like he's
I have
clearly
no
not.
time for patience.
Yeah, he's
None.
clearly not.
That line he
he
says, he's
bounced
like,
back
"Don't worry, I believe
remarkably
him."
well.
Yeah.
He's Joel, man. He
Yeah.
can run
Yeah.
through a
My
fucking
bad.
brick
It's the
building.
Mando. What are you talking?
Absolutely.
Grogu,
Like,
heal
in
me.
the game, that scene in the game was so just brutal to me, just because you see an emotionless Joel about to like bust a man's kneecap, speaking very monotone, like very calmly, like
Right.
I'm gonna kill you if you don't tell me. Then does it anyway. It was just it seemed a bit more brutal, but I genuinely just love Pedro Pascal's performance because it's just like, dude, this is as realistic of a Joel as I could imagine. And
Yeah.
even
And I'm
in that,
Yeah.
it's still like the fact that you bounce back so quickly is fucking crazy.
yeah, and not
That's some
to
video
go
game
Maybe
healing
too
it's
magic
much,
right there.
good.
like not to go too much into part two, but just a tiny thing. Well, it's like that. This is what the games are about. Like this is what
Yeah.
happened. Like Joel's brutality, and it's
Uh-huh.
like just this is a realistic world, and that's what they're trying to show. So I think this episode is like a great stepping stone into just the rest of
Yeah,
the
the rest of the
series.
series.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Agreed.
absolutely. And the repercussions that
No, I think I'll just skip over what Avi just said because I didn't hear it. Eddie, you made a point that you can't really have Joel be as violent as he is in the game, and I
Yeah.
think that selectivity works really well in this instance because as someone that's not used, I mean, I heard from like I think Tess's opening scene. They kind of like refer to Joel being like this really vicious guy. Obviously, when they find his brother a few episodes ago, he's like spooked and was like, I can't be doing the shit we used to do, man. And I'm like, what was Joel doing? But seeing it in this circumstance to where he's pulling it out, you know, whatever has been unseen in the show, we're now seeing at least a little bit of it when Ellie's missing and she's clearly in dire need, but my girl does it herself. We love it. Besides the point, I feel like that selectivity and having it come out in this particular instance was really well placed because if they did have it throughout the show, it wouldn't have the same gravity that it does here. And I don't know that you would be able to have the same um I think likability, I think the game format's different than just television, and there's a different audience for television that I think it's just less palatable for if you have like a very violent lead,
Yeah.
especially in like a father figure position. But I think the fact that they did pull it out in this instance makes it's like the best usage of it to be able to showcase that.
It's like
Yeah,
when
I
Liam
think
Neeson goes ape shit in like Taken, right? It's like that.
Mm.
A father figure should not be like murdering people for no reason. He should be doing it to save his daughter,
Or
right?
his daughter.
That's why he should be doing
Never get
it.
the
Snapping
murder.
necks. Ah,
fighting to save
no, it's
yourself,
true.
nah. Fighting to save your
For a
daughter,
son?
there we
You know
Not
what I
go.
even.
mean? You
And
might
listen,
get
it's
off.
the dog for John Wick, and it's the
Exactly.
daughter for Liam
Mhm.
Neeson.
That's how it
And I
works.
guess the cat
Exactly.
for like Key and Peele, don't they do that? Don't they like go save?
They do
Oh,
murder for
Keanu.
a
Oh, I
cat.
didn't watch that
Yeah,
one.
they do go.
Yeah.
That's
Wow, the
crazy.
classic
But I think
to
the
proceed get out. Oh, sorry.
no, you're good. Well, I think the game, like this is what everyone's been talking about for years. It's like the Last of Us story doesn't belong in the video game medium, and with the show coming out now too, I think there's proof that it totally does because the game has a lot of benefits where it's like you don't need a couple characters every couple episodes coming in and be like, you used to do bad shit, you know? You play as
Right.
Joel doing the bad shit. And it's like it works.
Bad person.
Waves and waves of just CPUs just mowing them down.
It's
Wow.
like mass murder.
Exactly. So when you get
So
to
he
the
has, like, a
winter
body
scene,
count.
yeah,
That's
definitely
crazy
a
body
lot.
count.
And so when you get to the
Yeah.
winter scene, someone's like, "You fucked up and killed someone we like." I was like, "Yep, I know that." You know,
It was
Like,
me.
It's bad.
It was like, I definitely did that. My bad, bro. Actually, I'm not
Um,
sorry. That's literally what the character was like. I'm
Just
not
kills
I think
sorry.
it's
them.
cool. There's like advantages with the TV medium, and they're doing a different thing with it. This is a different story. It's just hard for me to, of course, like separate it sometimes. But
No, it's fair.
but
I
I
will
just
say
think it's
that-
cool. Like there's advantages with both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
One
it's.
thing I will say
Go ahead.
that I really like the progression. Oh, sorry.
No.
I really like the progression of showing Ellie's loss of innocence in the show as opposed to the game for me currently. I think that there's just so many different moments, especially with how they've shown Ellie's backstory and the certain places of with Sam and Henry. Even though I didn't really like that episode in the portrayal of Sam and Henry, I really do like the significance of
Mhm.
that loss for Ellie and how it's portrayed. Then having the flashback episode of her losing Riley to this episode, it felt more like it felt more sequential in a way that makes sense to me. Where it's like, okay, we do have a very solid timeline of Ellie's loss of innocence until like the end, right? The eventual end of this part of the story, right?
Yeah.
So I personally really do enjoy it. Simultaneously though, like the game does a very masterful job of it. Like like Abby's saying, it's two different mediums, but I personally really enjoy what they're doing with Ellie. Just in general, Bella Ramsey's killing it,
Yeah.
and really happy she's doing Ellie justice.
It
Awesome.
is so impressive, especially knowing her from Game of Thrones and Hello Birdie, I believe, which came out a little while ago. To see her progression in her career and her acting just continuously be overstepped by, or not overstepped, but like continuously like progress into like a new level of like young mastery. It's really, really great to see. And I think these past two episodes, really, I think have distinguished her acting ability and her range of emotions that she's able to tap into. Because she definitely, and the scene obviously requires it, she goes to some very intense places just to be able to stay alive. She says the one thing that Joel said to never say, which is that she's infected, right? She tells the people who are trying to kill her, and it makes them stop just long enough for her to get away, which also they got your James and your Troy Baker real dirty on that kill. When they did that, I was like, oh my God, I was shook. I didn't know how to feel about it. But yeah, amazing job overall with Bella Ramsey in this one.
Well said, Eddie. Yeah, seriously, Bella Ramsey's great. I feel like I've been thinking about how great her performance is since Sunday night. Honestly, I'm like, I can't even exhaust it enough. I think everyone on the cast is incredible. I don't want to take it away from Bella too much. But I think something I have noticed is like the different villains that they've been introducing. at least from my perspective, like they still serve like a similar theme, but they're all different enough. And watching like the ways that they in their kind of individual goals or their vendettas challenge Ellie and Joel, it's just been really interesting to watch. Especially seeing Ellie navigate it not only as like someone growing up in the apocalypse and having like a whole nother set of like reasons to not trust people because you're in an apocalypse. It's interesting seeing her being able to like display that growth and that maturing throughout these different villains kind of as like checkpoints of her innocence being lost. It's really incredible. I'm loving the kid. She's great.
Yeah, I think taking because in the game too, I think there's a whole portion where you get to Joel kind of mowing down more people and then getting to the town that they're at. But in this one, they really just focus that time on Ellie and her relationship with David, even though small, just in the cage. It's like really powerful. And I think it sets up a lot for her character in the future. And one key difference I noticed from the game too, which I like a lot, is that in the game she kind of starts the fire by accident, but in this one it's a very purposeful thing. And I think it kind of just like symbolizes like how much she's willing to like burn down, and like you feel the rage inside her and then everything's on fire. I just think it was a really cool way to like just symbolize like what she's going through. Like after this moment with David, she's never going to be the same. Like even when Joel grabs her at the end in the game too, in the game she's stabbing David and then Joel comes to hug her while she's stabbing her to make her stop. But in the game, in the show, she gets out and then we saw Joel hugs her, and it's such a sweet moment. But what do you guys think like about those differences?
So yeah, I think in the game, like you're pressing the button, right? So you're stabbing this dude, right? I don't believe it's a cutscene. I believe like you're the person who's actively stabbing David. So I think just in terms of impact, it's like it's never gonna be the same because like you're the person who's genuinely like killing David. If I remember that correctly, I believe that's how that
I don't know
goes.
if
But I,
genuinely killing.
yeah,
I
you're
think in the
doing
game, at least I could be wrong with this, but I'm
it.
pretty sure in the
I think
game there's a point in which like the button mashing is no longer necessary, and she's just
yeah,
she
and
goes
then
into like a
Yeah.
cutscene of her like
character
just
go,
going ape shit on him, and I think that's one of the interesting characteristics of the game is that it kind of takes that control out of your hands, and
yeah.
it kind of shows her losing literally losing control of her own temper. Sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to interrupt you.
No, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I was just more so just again trying to illustrate the like that there is a sense of control in the character that you're playing when you're playing as Ellie, right? But like in the show, I really did just based off of Bella Ramsey's performance in that particular angle, which I'm pretty sure is exactly the same as the game. You still feel that rage. You still feel this like sense of this need to survive, right? Um, and having it be outside instead of in the fire, though, like I do think aesthetically it's more pleasing in the fire. Like you're literally in the jaws of death and you find comfort. But like to come outside makes more sense because like
Mhm.
don't hug in the fire. Like, like leave the fire.
I think
But
it's
yeah,
interesting because like she literally like she has to get herself out of it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the big difference that I kind of almost like more about in this interpretation is that yes, she still kills David in the game and in the series, but the fact that she has to get herself out of that now dangerous situation of the fire, like or the building coming down on top of them, I think it just adds another layer to her like own growth and independence as a person, right? These past two episodes have really demonstrated that Ellie can in fact survive on her own and that she's no longer a kid, as you put it, Fumba. You know, she's growing up. You know, she's her innocence is dwindling away, as they say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like a very clear juxtaposition of like leaving the fire and going into like icy snow. It's like there's kind of this reprieve that feels like almost heaven-like, leaving like a very hell-like situation. I really like that. I did see because I have been watching like after the episodes, people compare it to like the game. Um, that there is that like uncomfortably long moment of like Ellie just stabbing David. And I think there's an interesting narrative benefit to having Joel not see her do that. And I don't know based on where this can go, considering like I don't know where the game's leading, but I think him witnessing that and knowing his fear of her losing her innocence, that could like spark more conversation or even like hint to him, or now he knows, he's seen that she's done something that's like clearly very traumatizing and would change her. But I don't imagine Ellie would tell him what happened or tell him that that happened. So the fact that he only sees her once she like emerges from the situation, I
Mm.
think can like play into really interesting dynamics between them to where he doesn't quite know how far she's gone, especially if she's not willing to tell him. So I think there's some like juicy narrative parts to come from that because he wasn't the one to pull her off of David.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what I'm hoping on too. I hope the show does take different directions, even though I think what part one and part two in the games, I think they're perfect as is. But I love adaptations, which kind of are what they are, adaptations, using their source material, actually doing something different. And yeah, I hope they go a different route and tell it like not a different story, but just one that they're more confident in telling with like the medium they're working with.
Yeah. I feel like that's the best you can hope for.
Yeah.
All right, for this next segment, we're going to be doing something with spoilers. So for anybody that doesn't want to be checking this stuff out, you can go ahead and skip to the end of the video for our ratings. So there's this one segment in the episode where David tells Ellie that she has a violent heart, which is actually kind of an interesting part because it kind of dives into part two. Avi, you were really passionate about this when we were talking about this earlier. Do you kind of want to walk us through this a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, so this was one part I definitely noticed that was a difference in the game, and the whole show has been doing a lot of building up to part two, where the creators of when they made the first video game obviously didn't know what they were going to do in the future completely. So I think the show is doing this to varying degrees of success, but I think this is one that kind of works, where they hint at Ellie's violent nature and what she's capable of doing in the future. With David telling her she has a violent heart like him. And I think this is just a great way to showcase that. Once again, what Fumbo was talking about before, this is like Ellie's loss of innocence. This is who she really is. And putting that episode with Riley before, and even showing us her stabbing that infected like way earlier in the season, it really does a good job with just the characterization of who Ellie is. Like, I think one thing the game does there, she gets to a lot of brutal moments, of course, but I think the show is doing a really good job at naturally showcasing her kind of descent into this person that she is going to be, this like violent person who is a lot more in tune with like the brutal side of Joel than like viewers would like to admit. And I think that's just something interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think about the last episode and then in tandem with this one, right, where Ellie has that moment with the drill sergeant, I believe, who just lays out the two options to her of, hey, you're either gonna be like a bootlicker or you're gonna be an admiral, and like if you're gonna be an admiral, you're gonna be able to do good things. And just seeing Ellie's mindset and perspective of saying like we can actually change things, make things better for everybody involved. And I guess the tragedy of not only losing a significant like friend or even just a lover, but like having that hope or having that future being ripped away after getting bitten, right? Like she like a literal infection that even though she's not gonna turn, she is like that hope or that potential of being like a great person and changing the future for the better is might potentially be ripped from her, especially knowing what's going to happen in part two to me, right? Like the descent that she's going to undertake. I feel like that, I don't want to say it's foreshadowing, but I just think like thematically that's like really great writing, but also very sad.
I think it's like that's like perfect because Ellie turns into a violent, rageful maniac in part two. And like building that up naturally is the best thing that this season can do. And I think this season has a pacing problem. I say this like every episode, but it's also like I think it's like the same way. Like if you tell someone Game of Thrones season 1 is completely different from the rest of the show, right? The rest of the show isn't about Game of Thrones season 1. It's about the actions that happen in there that leads to the rest of the show. But I genuinely think that part 2 is the crux of the series. Like that is what the series is all about and what it's leading to. And they also said like they're putting part 2 into multiple seasons. And I think by the end of the season, it's going to replicate that introductory season of Game of Thrones and House of Dragons did too. So I think that's what they're kind of building for. And that's why I think it has a pacing problem, but once again, once we get to season 2 and it slows down completely, I would maybe be able to tell why they did that. We're just not there yet.
I think that just kind of brings into an interesting discussion of like Ellie starting the fire, right, in the game versus how it's incidental in the actions with David. And I think that's a big big change that they decided to do. One, it's very intentional that she starts this blades in order to cause a distraction. The other one, it's in her rage, it's in her fury, it's in her vengeance of like how fucking crazy this guy is, that she accidentally sets the entire place on fire. And in her defense as well, most prevalently, I might add, which is kind of an interesting angle. What do you guys think in comparison to those two, that little small difference that they did? What might be some of the symbolism? I know English. Symbolism behind that small little choice that they decided to alter from the game.
Yeah.
I definitely think it's like Ellie like uncontrolling of her rage, but I think that also ties into what we were talking about before with Joel hugging her outside. And I think that's just interesting because in the game it feels like Joel is trying to save her from herself, from turning into Joel, and I think that works perfectly in the game. But here it feels like Ellie, well, all this person who Ellie is always there, whether Joel was there or not. You know, of course she's mirroring Joel's actions in many parts, but this side of Ellie has always been there. And I think he does a better job with that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Shannon touched on this before she had to leave, unfortunately. Like the fact that we never see Joel never really truly sees or have any inclination what happened in there, or maybe consumed, but like he's unaware of what Ellie has been through at this point. Will also dictate like a different dynamic between Ellie and Joe as opposed to the video game, because him stumbling onto the body and showing that like, damn, you could just be me, right? You could be like me, and I don't want that. Like, we not see that inclination within Joel at this point, and not immediately, rather, right? But I also think that it does do like a better job of showcasing Ellie's descent and her willingness to like instill like violence onto, or put violence onto another person, because for her to take such a drastic action as to start a fire purposely just to stop him from leaving, right? Like just so that he can't escape, and it's such a crazy move, like in all honesty, right?
Like David deserved it 100%, but it's just like the way that Ellie like goes about it, you know?
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the scary parts. I mean, and she does such a good job of like, I mean, she plays it so well. There's so many things that have to happen in that short period of time when David's on top of her, and she goes through each and every one of them like really well. You know, it's impressive to witness her having to like, you can see it on her face, her thinking about the knife, the fact this fucker's on top of her, right? You know, the fact he's saying like this horrendous shit to her, you know, it's really like crazy to like witness how well she's able to like go through each of these segments. So to me, like her going off like that, it seems, and like as it was in the series or in the game as well, it seemed completely justified in like how long she was doing it, even if it was a little bit excessive. Because I mean, I think once you reach that certain point where you're willing to kill somebody like that, you know, I think you might reach like a level of hysteria.
Oh, definitely.
Finally, just breaking free from this fucking psychopath, you know. So I thought that was kind of an interesting moment, and again to kind of highlight on the fact that Joel doesn't see that. I think that's a really interesting and might be kind of a cool thing that they might be able to explore in season 2 of like what David did or was trying to do, like room her and do terrible things and let her join into his weird ass fungi cult.
But yeah, I think they could tie into that depending on how they treat the next episode, because then
because
it's
the next episode's all about
the
Joel.
hospital. It's
it's
Joel's
gonna-
secret, like
Joel's
what
secret.
happens what Ellie didn't see, so
Yeah.
maybe they do tie that in. It's like they both
Sure.
have these things, but I don't know how it would work if they both have these secrets like with each other. Would that be like narratively impactful? Because Joel knows what happened, like for the most part, I'd say.
I
Right.
think you can piece it together. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the look on her face when she looks
Covered
into
in
his
blood.
eyes is he knows something bad has happened. It'll be a big tell on what they decide to do with it in the coming episode.
Hmm.
What do you guys think, I guess, moving forward with this? What do you guys think are going to be going from this episode? Where do you think they're going to be taking it in the final episode? Any big changes from the game, really?
I hope they add the giraffe. I thought the giraffe was earlier in the game, but it's actually after this segment.
so.
Yeah.
I thought it was. I remember that.
Yeah. So I hope they
Okay.
add the giraffe, but then they also have to do the entire hospital sequence. This is a shorter episode of the series too, so I don't know how they can manage everything. My theory is that there's going to be one major difference from the game to the show. I don't know what the difference is going to be, but I think narratively they kind of have to do something different for it to work at this point.
Yeah. There's a big section in there, right?
Yeah.
I don't like. I know there's like 1 or 2 more segments before like they finally get to the hospital. You know what I mean?
I think
Because it's like another season at that point, right? In the game, it's another season. No, God, it's been so long.
Mm-hmm.
The beginning of the game is so fresh.
Yeah, no, because it's spring, right? Yeah, so it's gonna be. Yeah, that makes sense.
So they make it to the other side. I think that might be. It'll be interesting to see if like that's how they want to do it. It's like they have this horrible like season. That's how they do it. They have you go through a nice up, and then something terrible happens at the end of your season. Next season,
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So that's kind of like the thing that they're going through right now. It'd be interesting if that's how they handle it. Just skip up to spring, and they're just like, all right, we're here, everybody. Just like have them right there. Like just skip all that other stuff that they go through. Like, did anything else happen? No.
I honestly think that it's gonna be like this episode combined with the next one's gonna be like Joel's rampage, right? Obviously, because it's the last episode.
Because he also has to heal up.
Yeah, so they're either gonna have more time or he's just gonna.
I think there's going to be a time jump for healing. He's just going to heal while they walk, and then they're going to be in the hospital.
That's how you do it, right? That's how you do it.
It's gonna be
Yeah,
like
bandages and pills.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of two things, right? The time skip and he kills more people, or they keep it here and he kills less people. But he's going to kill people regardless. I think that's really what's gonna happen. But I think one major difference, maybe the introduction of Abby, or like the hints of Abby in this, because the connection of part 2 and whatnot, like or maybe see that as a reveal. I'm not sure, but like,
I wonder if they're gonna start with Abby and her father, like as the doctor. That'd be an interesting way. But
I think that'd be a good intro for season 2. I think that'd be a good intro for.
But that's the thing too, where it's like I think they need to put Abby at the end of this episode. Right. If they are starting part 2 next season, like directly, I think they need to put Abby in this.
Right. I think we need to like be introduced to her at some point, or some
capacity, right? Well, she's definitely got to be in the room because he gets shot and then she like hides from Joel, or is her dad gets shot and then she like ultimately like hides from him or something like that, right?
No, I think she comes to the room later or something.
Oh, you're right.
But
I had a hard time playing that game.
Joel, I guess.
it's a burn.
Yeah. And Avi, you're like, I love it.
I do love it. It's just torture.
It's good stuff. Yeah, I'm really excited to see how they kind of have the climax of the series is played out. And one thing that I find to be kind of interesting about this show is that in the game, you have these moments where it's all right, this is the zombie section. All right, this is the game section, or this is the human section. But something that's been interesting that's been happening, at least with the series that I've noticed, is that the more and more we go through the series, the more the thing that scares us is not the zombie, it's some person. It's a person, right? And I think that's something that is interesting, that even in an apocalypse where Mother Nature says, all right, you guys need to sit down, right? Even in a circumstance like that, human beings are still going to find a way to be just fucking awful to each other.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that
And
right
look-
there.
I think that's one of the greatest strengths with the game and this episode in general with David, because David is like the scariest part of the game, in my
Mhm.
opinion. It's like David and clickers. That's about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say like
A bloater that
it's like-
rips your mouth off every once in a while.
Nah.
Yeah.
Not that bad. It's not
He's
that
doing
bad.
too much. He's doing too much.
You're trying
Yeah.
too hard, okay?
Yeah, no, I feel like the difference between The Last of Us and The Walking Dead is that, right? Like the scariest thing in The Walking Dead are the humans, but like the scariest thing, everything's scary in The Last of Us. Like everything kind of sucks. So it's a lose-lose most of the time.
Yeah.
Which is makes it more engaging for me personally. But
Definitely.
yeah.
Sweet. All right, guys, let's get Shaylin back in here so we can do our scores. We'll be right
we're-
back. Out of how many Troy Bakers would you guys, out of five,
Troy
out of
Bakers.
Troy Bakers, how
Okay.
many Troy Bakers would you rate this episode?
I give this episode 4.8 Troy Bakers out of 5 Troy Bakers.
It's in English. Bumba, what do you got?
Yeah, I'm gonna give this I really like this episode.
Less than a minute, buddy. Less than a minute.
Five. Yeah, 5 for Bakers.
Five. Avi, what do we got?
That's
buddy?
the
Four
house.
Troy Bakers.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I'm gonna give it a 4.3 Troy Bakers.
Ooh.